Hello, guys, and welcome to my YouTube show, Ruben's History Show. Today, I'm going to talk about the political plague of Brezhnev's Politburo, which lasted from 1980 all the way to 1985, when it came to an end when Konstantin Chernenko died on March 11th, 1985, when he was at the age of 73. So basically, the political plague of Brezhnev's Politburo was a period of when a lot of Leonid Brezhnev's Politburo started to die because they were very old, because they were 60, 70 years old. And that's the reason why they started dying, and their health was really bad, and they started dying so quickly. So, and there were some reports saying that the Soviet or Russian mafia killed the Brezhnev's Politburo during the 80s, the early 80s, when Brezhnev's Politburo started to die. So the Soviet political plague of Brezhnev's Politburo began in 1980 when Alexei Kosygin, who was the prime minister of the Soviet Union, or the premier of the Soviet Union for just 16 years, from October 14th, 1964, all the way to October 23rd, 1980, when he resigned from his post as the premier of the Soviet Union, following the time when he was in the hospital because he was too sick, and he resigned as the prime minister of the Soviet Union. And he was succeeded by Nikolai Tikhonov, who succeeded him as the prime minister of the Soviet Union. And he was the prime minister throughout Brezhnev all the way to Gorbachev time, when it was in 1985. He was no longer the prime minister of the Soviet Union anymore. And then he was succeeded by someone else. So Kosygin resigned his post as the prime minister of the Soviet Union on October 23rd, 1980, a year after the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan under the leadership of Leonid Brezhnev on December 24th, 1979, which took place a year before the United States boycotted the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow, the Soviet Union. So, and then he died on December 18th, 1980, at the age of 76. He died at the age of 76. Kosygin, because he was born on February 21st, 1904, in Saint Petrograd, or which is today St. Petersburg, in the Russian Federation today. So he died, and his funeral was attended by Leonid Brezhnev, Nikolai Tikhonov, and Yuri Andropov, who was the KGB of the Soviet Union, and Brezhnev was the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which basically meant you're the leader of the country. And Tikhonov was the prime minister of the Soviet Union when Kosygin resigned as the prime minister of the Soviet Union on October 23rd, 1980, when he was hospitalized at the time. So in 1981, 1982, in the winter of those 2 years, Brezhnev was incapable of running the country because he was sick, and he was in the hospital for some time, and he couldn't rule the country because he was sick at the time, and he had multiple strokes and heart attacks as his term as the general secretary of Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which basically meant you're the president of the country. So during the winter of 1981, 1982, the country was being governed by Yuri Andropov, who was the chairman of the KGB from 1967 all the way to 1982, which was the KGB was basically a Soviet police force, which was a Soviet agency, or like the Russian version of the CIA, which was a police force in the Soviet Union. And Dmitry Ustinov governed the country as well, together with Andrei Gromyko and Mikhail Suslov. Suslov was the second secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union from December 9th, 1965, all the way to January 25th, 1982, when he died. And Ustinov was the Minister of Defense, so he was basically in charge of the military of the Soviet Union. Ustinov. So those four men governed the Soviet Union while Brezhnev was absent during his time because he was sick and ill. He was a very old man because he was at the age of 75 at the time when the four men governed the Soviet Union while he was absent from his duties as leader of the Soviet Union. So he was very sick. And also, a year before the early 80s, it was 1975, Brezhnev suffered his first heart attack. And he was in the hospital for some time, Brezhnev. And then a year later, in 1976, Kazygin received his first heart attack in 1976, a year after Brezhnev received his first heart attack at the time. And then on January 25th, 1982, Mikhail Suslov died. He died because he was sick, and because he was born in 1902, and he died in 1982. So he died at the age of 69, Suslov, because he was sick, and he was succeeded by Konstantin Chernenko as the second secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in January 25th, 1982. That was before Leonid Brezhnev died in November 1982 when he was at the age of 75. So Brezhnev died on November 10th, 1982 at the age of 75, a month before his 76th birthday, which would take place on December 18th, 1982, because he was born in 1906 in the Ukraine, but then it was under the Russian Empire. So he was born during the time of Nicholas II of Russia, who was the Tsar of the Russian Empire. So following the death of Brezhnev, people began to realize that Brezhnev was not a good guy, because Brezhnev caused the corruption in the Soviet Union when he invaded Afghanistan, and the oil prices decreased under Brezhnev when Brezhnev invaded Afghanistan in December 1979. And then the members of the Politburo were discussing who was going to be the new leader of the Soviet Union following Brezhnev's death, which took place on November 10th, 1982. So, also Brezhnev wanted Chernenko to succeed him as General Secretary of Communist Party of the USSR, but the Politburo decided that Yuri Andropov was going to be the new leader of the Soviet Union. So Andropov became new leader of the Soviet Union following the death of Brezhnev on November 10th, 1982 in Moscow in the USSR. So under Andropov time, Andropov organized the funeral of Brezhnev, and he also gave a speech on the Lenin's Museum to dedicate Brezhnev's funeral. And he was elected as General Secretary of Communist Party of the Soviet Union after the death of Brezhnev. And Andropov made quite few changes to the Soviet Union. because he wanted to fight against corruption, and the corruption in the Soviet Union was known as the economic stagnation, which was at the time the whole Soviet political system was corrupt, and it was very not organized well. It was very corrupt because the oil prices decreased and the economy was not doing very well. It stopped moving, and stagnate means basically to that basically means that the government is not moving, and something in the government is not moving. So that's what stagnation means. So we had the stagnation in the Soviet Union, and Andropov tried to fix the corruption in the Soviet Union during his term as the leader of the Soviet Union. And he was the first leader to be elected as the leader of the Soviet Union, as the chairman of the KGB. So, and then during his time, he made some changes to the Soviet political system. He made a law saying that if any Soviet citizen does not go to work without any good reason, you could be arrested and thrown into jail. So those were some of the new laws that Andropov made. He was a very strict, and he wanted to bring back the old version of the Stalin's regime, or when Stalin was in power. He wanted the Soviet people to be afraid of the Soviet government, and he wanted the people to be feared by the Soviet government. He wanted the people to be scared by the Soviet government. So that's what he basically did during his time as the leader of the Soviet Union from 1982 to 1984. So if you didn't go to work without any good reason, you could be arrested. For example, if you were sick or something, or if you were taking care of a baby or something, you could get arrested if you didn't go to your workplace, or if you didn't go to college in the Soviet Union. So that was kind of crazy, and it was kind of insane what Andropov was doing, because he was crazy, a crazy person. So during his rule, it was a very short rule. He didn't rule for a long time. He didn't hold a position as general secretary for a long time. He was just in power for just 2 years, from 1982 to 1984, when he died. So Andropov started to investigate some members of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and some of the members were arrested, and they were thrown into jail under Andropov's time, when Andropov was leader of the Soviet Union. So his rule was kind of short, and he was in the hospital for some time. His hospital deteriorated throughout 1983, and he didn't appear in public that much when he was leader of the Soviet Union, because he was sick, and he had to stay in the hospital for some time. And his wife, Tanya Andropova, had to take care of him while he was sick. So his wife was taking care of him while he was sick, as the General Secretary of Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And then on February 9th, 1984, Yuri Andropov died at the age of 69, when he was still leader of the Soviet Union. And once again, we had a funeral held in Moscow for Andropov's funeral, and they announced that the new leader of the Soviet Union will be Konstantin Chernenko, who was very old, and he still got elected as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union on February 9th, 1984. So he was very old. He was 72 at the time, and he was going to be 73 in the year 1984. So, and there were some reports that Yuri Andropov was killed by the Soviet Russian mafia, and there were some rumors that Brezhnev and Andropov were killed by the Soviet mafia during that time, in the 1982 and 1984, when Andropov and Brezhnev died. So Chernenko didn't rule the country for a long time as leader of the Soviet Union, and he was in the hospital for quite some time. And then in 1980, while he was on vacation in August 1983, he ate some smoked fish, and he died No, he didn't die. He stayed in the hospital for some time because he ate some fish and he got sick. And he had to stay in the hospital for some time. And then also during his rule, he was also hospitalized in the hospital as leader of the Soviet Union, and he was also sent to the Kuslovats, which was the hospital where he was sent, where he was hospitalized in Kuslovats, which is located in the Russian Federation today. It's small. It's a town in Russian or the Russian Federation. Also during Andropov's rule, he also lived in the Gustavsky, which is an apartment building where Brezhnev and Suslov lived in during their time. And then Chernenko was hospitalized during that time, and he couldn't talk very well. He couldn't. Whenever he was trying to read a speech, he was just breathing heavily, like Brezhnev was, because Brezhnev had trouble speaking and he was mumbling. That was the same thing with Chernenko. So, and then a lot of people in the Soviet Union were saying that, oh my gosh, that Chernenko is like a second Brezhnev because he has trouble speaking, and he's breathing heavily. And then also during Chernenko time, it was in 1984 that he also managed to get a trade pact with China, or communist China, which still remains a communist country today, or the legacy of the Soviet Union. And then also, and on May 8th, 1984, under the leadership of Chernenko, the Soviet Union announced that it will not participate in the Summer Olympics of 1984, which was to be located in Los Angeles in the summer of 1980. And several other communist nations did not announce that they will not participate in the Olympics. And so that was basically one of the reasons why the Soviet Union and the other several communist countries did not appear in the Summer Olympics, because the United States boycotted the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow. Boycott basically means that you're leaving the Olympics. You're not going to attempt the Olympics. So that's what boycott basically means, like leaving something. So, and then also under Chernenko time, in 1984, he also made some few changes to the Soviet Union, because he made some changes, and a lot of people were not being chased around in the movie theater or in the grocery stores by this police force in the Soviet Union known as Militsaya, which is a police force in the Soviet Union. They were not being chased. They were not chasing people anymore and asking them questions. Why are you not going to work? That all changed under Chernenko time. And then also in 1984, and November 1984, the Minister of Defense, Dmitry Ustinov, was sick, and he was unable to attend the October Revolution Parade, which was held on November 7, 1984. And he did not attend the October Revolution Parade. And then a month later, on December 20th, 1984, Dmitry Ustinov died in Moscow. He died while he was in the hospital. And then on March 11th, 1985, Konstantin Chernenko died at the age of 73 in Moscow, the Soviet Union. And with his death, it brought an end to the 5 years of Brezhnev's Politburo dying, or the Soviet political plague of Brezhnev's Politburo. So with Brezhnev's death, with Konstantin Chernenko's death, it brought an end to the Soviet Brezhnev's Politburo dying. So, and then after that, Gorbachev was elected as the leader of the Soviet Union. as General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union following Chernenko's death. And that brought an end to the 5 years of Brezhnev's Politburo dying. So it got the name the 5 years of the 5-year plan because of the 5-year plans that were established in the Soviet Union. The 5-year plans were basically like the plans to create the more factories and more cars and the productivity. So the Soviet Union, the Communist Party, or members of the Communist Party would say, okay, in 5 years we need to do this, we need to create more factories, we need to create more cars, and we need to rise the productivity by 10%. So basically that's what the Communist Party, members of the Communist Party wanted to do. And that's what the 5-year plans were basically about. So, yep, that's the 5 years of Brezhnev's Politburo dying from 1980 to 1985. And I'm going to make more videos about the history of the Soviet Union in my future videos. And I'll see you guys in the next video.